Welcome back to Illuminating Being, where we have been exploring really the spaces where integrated being and illuminating being intersect. And so we'll get into what that means. But I'm Elizabeth, and alongside me is my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Keith Summers. Together, we have been bringing kind of the wisdom of integrated living and the lens of pediatric wellness to really explore how nourishment connects with mind, body, and spirit. Today, we are going to tap into a topic that we previously discussed, leaning into the season of fall. So we spoke about the idea of seasonal foods and, being that this is my favorite season, the time of harvest and really slowing down. I love to think about, grounding ourselves and the warmth of togetherness and comfort and everything that the change in weather really does to us. But I think today we're going to go back to the roots. So focusing on fall's gifts. And Dr. Summers, this is a space that you like to talk about. And I see your book behind you that we'll get into later on. So welcome to the conversation again. And I look forward to where we go with it.
Awesome. Always a pleasure to be here with you, Liz. I think the whole essence of this is conversations. I think the extension of, as we've sort of grown over the years, having our visits in the office, but I think that's been the exquisite pleasure of beyond just, what the visit is in essence of like the child's health, but in the whole family, the larger community. Hopefully this, I think, podcast can help deliver is more connection and belonging for people to join the conversation with us. We don't have all the answers for everybody, and there is not one right answer. I think that's sort of part of our challenge in society, that quick fixes are not the process of how we maintain health or become healthier in life. It's a journey, right? So I think the steps we take and how we can help nudge those along.
Just for our listeners, one of my blessings and one of the reasons why, I jump on here and want to share Dr. Keith Summers with you all is he was making rounds when I had my firstborn son, which will be soon 19 years ago. And, I was just kicking off my motherhood journey. And there was something about the comfort and the calmness that you brought into the room. And, throughout our visits and our kind of the proceeding of having additional children into my life, there was something about the village aspect and, how the pediatrics office became a part of my village, and really the comfort and the connection of just realizing what is health, what is important, what is relative to really the child's growth. So that's kind of, me giving back to the community and making you talk to maybe a larger platform so they get that as well.
And that's, I think that's part of the quintessential nature of not knowing what impact you have in your day-to-day and your career, because you don't get these opportunities to have conversations in a bigger audience that can share some of these moments. Hopefully there are other families that have had this sort of connectivity. And I think, just saw one of my former patients yesterday with their child. And I think, the question that continues to come up now is like, you're not retiring anytime soon. Or when are you retiring? And our family, that word doesn't really exist. And I think that's sort of the challenge of, succession planning and like, what does that even mean? Or when do you, when have you hit your max of sorts? And I feel like, I don't know that that'll ever go away. I mean, maybe I won't be in the practice per se, but I feel like there's still a lot to give. And over a career and a lifetime, you see multiple things happening and have perspectives that, just like our grandparents and parents have perspectives. So it's really, in my mind, the visit is always multi-generational. So I always welcome parents and grandparents and extended family to be part of the conversation and to be witness to this, because they have something to contribute as well.
I think it was just moments of the journey of grounding, right? And I think a big part of our conversations really, if you think about the last 20 years of what has been happening in the world of food and the whole process and the ultra processed. And so that was always kind of an interest of mine. And I found that, always had a spin of like, food is a practice of being present, of the interconnection of it all, of being kind and patient with your child, especially if you have selected eaters. So, I always thought there was some beauty in how you introduced the idea of nutrition as a part of, the overall, like, are you eating your vegetables? It wasn't just to ask, are you eating your vegetables? You generally just open the door to allow the child to have a conversation. So, with that, from your pediatric perspective, what role do you believe fall, since we're going to talk about fall, but fall foods play in supporting children's growth and really overall immunity as we enter into these months?
Right. And I think it's just the diversity, right? So I think as we look at how, the seasons unfold, I mean, we probably are growing things up. We had more access to foods, but I didn't eat tomatoes, you know, in the winter because that wasn't when they were harvested, at least not here. Maybe if you're in South America, tomato was on the plate because that's the harvest time of summer. So I think, it's just making us, I think, brings up the whole mindfulness of trying to eat consciously, mindfully, but because we walk into a supermarket now, we have no idea that there's a season. Like, I feel like today, the weather is such that every day is a different season. That's a whole another aspect of climate change. But we've lost a little bit of connectivity to, you know, the sort of rhythms of nature and what seasons are. I mean, yes, we know it's fall because it's told, but, it's not because it's pumpkin latte season in whatever world, but it is the pumpkin
That's
spice.
not a big fan. I'm not a fan either. It's too
Yeah.
sugary.
Yeah. I mean, but it is the transition in the time and just like, getting up now and it's dark early again. And so it's like time is changing, but helping to you incorporate that into sort of the meal planning. But, we've seen the differences in lifestyles that families are on the go, they're harried and hurried and getting out of the house, time to prepare a meal, all of this sort of thing. So, in one short visit, it's really hard to sort of like tackle every element of this. And so I think my goal is not to sort of, and I think we've talked, one of our sort of go-to people is Brene Brown and sort of making sure that there's no judgment in these visits. And as well as on this podcast, that we're not trying to shame or blame people. And a lot of what the currency in the world today is, shaming and blaming, and you're not doing enough, you're not doing it right. And to me, we've got, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they have all these wonderful, really smart people creating guidelines and recommendations. But listening to this book currently that, it's not about doing everything according to all the rules and laws. The real, importance is to know when to break the rules. Right. So if you don't have certain foods or certain things, what are things you can do to sort of, get to the place you need to be? And that's not to say that every day you don't want to go to McDonald's and get a fast food quickie, but there may be a time where you're just harried and there are some better options to choose if you have to make that choice of going for the fast food. And so I think for the fall foods, I mean, zucchini, corn, some of these are the fall vegetables. And I think, experimenting and trying different things out. I mean, I think it's one of the challenges. There's these great chefs and these great cookbooks, but oh my gosh, they can be an hour and a half to 2 hours prep when you read through some of these recipes. And that's,
That's where
maybe
my
great.
thought goes, because we're talking about, and I guess my question is fall foods geographically? Probably. So, like, I guess we're in the mid-Atlantic.
Right.
So what? Eastern board. So we're talking pumpkin, squash. Are they like
Right. Those are
apple
the fall. So
vegetables?
right. So that's really getting into the fall. So I think the book I have, this Jake McFadden, 60s, and he sort of breaks down to spring, early summer, midsummer, late summer, fall, and winter. Right. So I think
Okay.
because we really, summer is a big expanse of time, and there's like, the early summer sort of foods and fruits and vegetables that sort of are harvested. And certainly with climate change, things have been changing where things are grown and when things come to, be harvested. We've certainly seen some changes in that. And then with the loss of farmland and farming, that's created these whole industrial, creations of farming. And so I think, you know, I was looking, there was an article in the New York Times just about zucchini and sort of like it's this versatile, very healthy vegetable. I think everybody knows about them, but they come
I
in,
just made zucchini bread.
yeah, I mean, it's
Okay,
one of
well,
my
I didn't just
go-tos,
make it. I asked and it was made.
but it's a great source of nutrients. It's got one, it's a fruit. So that's our biggest other
Mm,
challenge is that many
zucchini is a
moons
fruit?
ago, many moons ago, the nomenclature was decided that many of us would be too hard to discern things because of the nature of things have seeds, they're fruits. So many vegetables that we have in the vegetable section of the supermarket are really fruits, like tomatoes.
Well, I knew that one. I didn't know
So
about zucchini.
anything that's got a seed is considered a fruit. So, pumpkins have seeds, so they are a fruit,
Fruit.
right?
I think
So
I
that
guess I
whole
know that, but
squash family are fruits, but it's just to have that conversation with everybody. I mean, it's sad that that's where, 100 years ago or whatever, they decided that the society was unable to manage that. And so we've really, I'll say dumbed down, but we've done a disservice to not only the fruits and vegetables, but to society and people to sort of think that, it's, it would be a mistake to sort of like mislabel things. And I think we continue to have that sort of hoax in sort of the way we sort of see wellness and sort of how we look at this whole.
yeah, I think it's like actually, it's like a whole lesson on just perspective and the importance of, being aware of why you do what you do from you know, where we've been, where we are, where we're headed. And so like thinking about, I mean, it's so simple, but fall to us because we've been raised in, a location where fall becomes fall when like the natural cues, right? You have cooler nights, like you said, shorter days, the leaves are changing. So we kind of like come within, which then turns to this whole idea of like stews and chilies and spices, but that might not be relative for like California or Florida, where I think isn't that when the citrus actually is growing. So,
Right. Right. So,
but all that to say is we're talking about fall for the Northeast region.
right.
But the idea of being cognizant of those changes, because it's not only happening for the food, but it's happening as us as beings, as you kind of
Right. And
move
I
through.
think, I think that's exactly it, just awareness of your location. And so when you're going to the farmer's market, what may be plenty in your season, whether it's winter, spring, summer, or fall, this is, you know, our summer, it's the winter in South America and, Argentina. So they still have winter, spring, summer, fall in some of
Just
those
different.
climates, but the tropics probably have more like spring, summer, summer, spring, although our winter, you know, sort of is what we're sort of like egocentric on how we see the world, right? It's
Right.
always based on us and not them.
Oh, but so I guess what we explored is that seasonal foods, no matter where you are, will affect your overall mood and or transitional and change, right? Like there's a change occurring, be it the weather, be it, the foods that we eat, be what's happening in our life. So just being cognizant is important. And then it just gives you an opportunity to reintroduce that idea and the opportunity to change in a way that can provide value.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things might be to just sort of explore what did your grandparents, grandmother, and great grandmother do, like just a throwback of what did they prepare, right? And more than likely, they cooked based on what was available at the time, which would have been seasonally, produce and things that were grown locally. Obviously, in the last 50, 60 years, because of transportation and moving foods across the country and across the world, we now have access to foods daily that we never had like that before, right? So that certainly changes our perspective on the fall season or any season.
I'm trying not to get too excited about fall, but if you highlight one or two must have fall foods. So just from your reflection of maybe your grandparents or kind of how you raise your children? What was something just an experience
Yeah.
that you focused on when it became fall?
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely, the
And how'd
zucchini,
you
I think
prepare these? Because I will say that I am lacking any creative spiel. Like, I saw a meme the other day where one of my big hardships, which I know I'm blessed, is why do I continue plan my meal to make taco, spaghetti, and what's our other staple? Well, lately stir fry, but
right.
and pizza, right? And so they're convenient, they're quick, but knowing that I would love to explore the idea of fall foods, like there has to be this whole space and time to be like, okay, what would I even do with the fall food?
think, I mean,
Let alone have, do it.
I think I have a whole new perspective on, mom meal planning. I mean, you know, it typically comes down to the moms to do the meal planning. And so we pretty much had a pretty set schedule of, it may have been spaghetti, we might have had meatloaf, we may have had a dairy meal, tuna, egg salad or something, had them pretty well set because, you know, time and energy that it consumes to think through all of these sort of things every day, to come up with a new idea for a meal. I mean, that's draining, right? And if you're doing
Tell me
that,
about it.
yeah. No, I think we do a disservice to moms in general about what it takes. And so I think having your go-to things, and I think repetition, I mean, we've traveled, which we've been, able to travel around different places. And, if we look at staples, rice, potatoes, beans, those are the common basic starting points for meals around the world. Part because they're plentiful, they're inexpensive, and they can be stored for long periods of time. So, I mean, when we have a food system or where we need to prepare things, but we don't want to have things that are perishable, these are going to be go-tos. And they also provide the basic of some carbohydrate and protein, which is critical for growth, right? So beans and rice, that's a staple in many places. Every day people eat that. Do we get bored with it? I mean, you can add some different spices, you can change it up a little bit, but when you have a good thing, you stick with
I
it.
would say I had a poke bowl yesterday. It was so delicious and completely different than like the stir fry. So you're right. Just if you add one or two different vegetables with a different spice, you have a completely new meal.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things I try to encourage now, which I feel like the American food process is bland. We started, it's like rice cereal. I mean, oh my God, the initial, like how to get started, and it was like cardboard, right? I mean, everything had no taste. So what I've tried to do over the last 10 plus years is to talk to people about introducing herbs and spices. I mean, not necessarily hot, spicy chili, but
Chili oil.
right. Yeah. And there will be people who have an affinity for that, who can tolerate that. But, why are we not giving the kids more flavor exposure? Because there's a lot more to discern. I mean, the problem is that we've created very limited palates. And so our kids are growing up with not knowing a whole lot of flavor. So they're not exercising their palate. And I feel like that's sort of one of my unspoken sort of things, is to sort of encourage families to sort of explore more palates. Now, the problem is if they don't do it themselves, it's hard for them to create that. So I think that's one of the things, maybe through these conversations, we'll find ways to sort of create a space of doing that more accessibly.
I would love some solutions that work.
Well, I
But,
mean, our neighbors,
exploring their palate.
yeah, I mean, our neighbor, my son's married to an Indian woman, and there's so many spices that they use, and they're also colorful, oranges, the red, there's turmeric and things. So things I didn't grow up with. Oh my gosh! I mean,
Right.
maybe we had some paprika that was red, oregano, pepper, and salt. Right? I mean, those were the major sort of spices that we use. I mean, and also all of these provide micronutrients. So I think the big world that we live in and what we're exposed to in all the advertisements are the big three, carbohydrates, fats, and protein. And that's for another conversation about where we go with that. But I think, in essence, carbs are seen as bad, but Carbs are the essence of life. I've got a book.
And like, that's another example of like, let's all take a moment and understand when this idea that carbs are bad became a part of a vernacular, and then like what aspired and kind of stemmed off of it. Because when you get to the root of it, they're not bad based on what is needed for us, but like what is the carb you're speaking of, right?
Well, I think that gets to the
Right.
ultra processed creation of carbohydrates. That can be bad, but it's really, I tell people, it's pretty much impossible to eat too many carbs. If you eat whole foods, you will be filled up. It's going to just be, I
Right. We
mean,
become full,
you'll be so saturated, you'll
actually
become
used to.
full. Right. And so, so I think there's opportunities to sort of, our goal, and part of my goal is to reframe eating. And I think we've talked about meals and my whole process of creating this one world eating and this 3-6-5 eating sort of philosophy of 3 meals a day, which I also tell families, I don't know that you need 3 meals a day. I mean, we're 5,000 years in this species, plus 3 meals a day probably didn't happen for 4,950 years. And even in the last 50 years, it's really hard to have 3 sit-down meals a day. So I don't think we're not designed to necessarily have 3 meals a day, but somehow it's become the
Indoctrined into
expectation
our approach.
of how we should feed ourselves. And then my sort of assessment of American, I mean, we haven't really given much to the food process, other than I think the way Americans eat is primarily snack. So if nothing else, America has introduced the snack as the sort of primary way of eating. Grazing, a quick grab, bags of food, whatever, granola bars. I mean, you name it, we've got such easy access to simple foods, which have a place, I think. There's no question about it. There is a place for that. But
It could
we've
be
sort of diminished, the community aspect of, like, how many people eat alone? How many people, aren't preparing whole foods? And, you know, we could go on and on about some of those things, but, I think helping to reinforce family times and what happens at a family meal. So the nutrition at a family meal is not just calories, and it's not just food, but it is the space of being together and creating belonging and conversation and a safe space to share.
the family meals or any, sharing food is an easy way for that belonging connection. So technically, I got you off the one question I did ask. So I'm going to put you back on the spot. So, what is an example of one or two must haves or a creative way to think about these fall foods that, you've become accustomed to or you find, you desire, just for the
Yeah.
listeners and myself?
I mean, I think the combinations, like right now, we've had some fresh corn that's been just exceptional this year. And it's really, to me, this is a peak time of year in the zucchini. So you mentioned stir fries. We like to stir fry, grill. I mean, putting things up on the grill and just, putting those sort of things together. And then throw in some rice. You got
You're
quinoa,
saying things. When you're saying things, you mean like the rooted vegetables
some of the
and
rooted
the
vegetables. We
fruit
like.
that people don't typically think they're
Right. So you
fruit.
can throw a potato in there. I like combinations of sweet potatoes, and zucchini. We do that frequently on the grill, sort of just grill them up, and they're a good complement to, we have either rice or quinoa or farro, which are some of our go-to grains. You have good protein there. We have tofu, which we'll frequently grill or bake as another protein source. And then always there's a salad, right? I think many different between growing up, we had iceberg lettuce. That was like the go-to thing. We
What is
try
that?
to go with romaine, arugula, some of the other, salads. So and they're relatively simple, but I think, I think creating some of the go-tos. I mean, those tend to be easy go-tos that we don't need a whole lot of recipes, because we like to use a spice called za'atar, which is a Middle Eastern spice, with a little bit of olive oil, which is the other thing for zucchini. One of the things to sort of maintain the skin is a combination of a little bit of olive oil, with that sort of helps to, keep it from getting burnt and losing the, I mean, it's 90% water is a zucchini. The other thing is reading about it. So that it's got antioxidants. So we don't think about the nutritional, like what are the health benefits of some of these foods, but they all have complementary things. Sort of bylines on things are eating your berries because they got all these antioxidants, things that help when you are having certain foods in your diet. And typically it's the proteins that broke down and you get these we call free radicals, which can do damage to cells. The foods that we eat can help to offset that. So the zucchini has antioxidants. It also has an element called lutein and zeaxanthin, and those are very good for our eyes and our sight and vision, and maintaining the health of our eyes. I mean, we are a vision and visual species. So really a lot of not only the talk that we're having in the podcast where people can see us and listen to us, those are two of our main sort of senses that sort of drive a lot of what we're doing. Right. So I think, and I have the other sort of magazine, the National Geographic is thinking about all these foods, but I hate that we have to say ugly foods, things that are misshapen, misfits. There's no reason not to eat them. So just because a fruit or a vegetable doesn't look as appealing, and if you go to the supermarket, they're only looking to sort of put out in front of you the most perfect. And I think we've spoken to this before. I mean, we're not looking for perfection. So perfection in the food is not about how it looks, because the content of that food, zucchini, carrot, because they're misshapen or whatever, doesn't change what's inside them.
They're perfect with their imperfections. So what I've taken, so for this week, for listeners, is really bring one fall food into your home, be it the roasted root vegetables you spoke of, or maybe simply a crisp apple or the corn on the cob, which my husband actually just grilled up corn on the cob. Amazing.
That's
Like, what?
amazing.
Like, I was
Yeah.
like, where did you learn this from? And he looked at me like I had like 3 heads. But really, the idea is notice how eating with the season shifts your energy. So while you bring those fruits that are fruits, those foods into your home, how does that affect, your energy? And then sharing these seasonal foods with someone else really provides just that richer connection, as we always kind of shared. So I know we typically provide a book recommendation.
And I'm just going to throw out one little quick, we're always looking for quick recipes. So I think, as you said, the corn, so you throw the corn on the grill and you throw some zucchini on the grill and you have some chickpeas. It's a nice blend, and you get some fresh tomatoes right now, which are also in season. You've got a nice chickpea zucchini salad that
Sounds
you don't,
amazing.
and
Look,
the
I was able
little,
to pull one out of you. I pulled a recipe out of you.
so I'm going for a little different. One of my parent of my patients wrote this book called The Elemental Haiku. So she basically wrote a haiku for every element in the periodic table.
So cool.
So cool. And so I thought, well, the couple haikus that we could talk about would be, the first element is hydrogen, right? And so if we look at carbohydrates, because I feel like, all of our vegetables, fruits basically are carbohydrates. And the three main elements that are essence of that are carbohydrate, are hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. So hydrogen is your single protein, fundamental, essential, water life, and star fuel. And then carbon, show-stealing diva. Throw yourself at anyone decked out in diamonds. Because the essence, it's food, but diamonds are also a carbon element. And oxygen is most of me is you. I strive for independence, fail with every breath. So if you think about what's in, say, a zucchini, it's got the carbohydrates, it's got the water. Obviously the air we breathe delivers primarily the oxygen. But then how our body's been designed to sort of process all of these sort of things is sort of, fundamentally the curiosity of how it all happens, right? I think, we're trying to share some of the, all right, let's just eat, forget about how it actually makes us better, which I think some people don't want to know, like how it all happens. But it's good that we're uncovering some of that. But at the end of the day, you don't have to know that this food and that food, provide X, Y, and Z. But I think intuitively people will understand the sort of balance in a diet and what foods you put together help, in health and wellness. And yeah. provide great opportunity.
Well, thank you for joining this conversation and our journey. And really, when we think about fall foods and seasonal living, it's all about connection and really bringing it together. So, this is Illuminating Being, where nourishment, presence, and connection come alive. So, until next time, we will show up. But thank you for listening.
Okay, well, it's great to see you. All right. Have a great rest of the week.